Uh, this is part 7 of What If Naruto Was an Outsider. Um, Chapter 6, Change of Hands. After my interesting conversation with the cloaked men, we hopped back onto the carriage and continued on our trek towards the land of hot springs. Shibi had briefly questioned me about my little conversation with the cloaked men, but I lied and told the elder Aburame that they were simply asking for directions. I'm not entirely sure if he believed me, but the clan head didn't push me further. So where exactly are we heading? So where exactly are we heading to in the land of hot water? I asked after waking up from a nap. I was currently laying atop my luggage. Sorry, I was currently laying atop the luggage on the top of the carriage. A large town nestled next to the hot spring near the center of the country. Next to, I'm sorry. Hakone is the name of the town. That's where we'll be meeting the group that will be transporting you the remainder of the way to the land of snow. We must have entered the country because even now I could tell that a certain humidity could be felt in the air. Well, anyhow. The humidity could be felt in the air around us. If one looked closely into the forest around us, a mist lingered. A mist lingered in the air in the far distance. Another Konoha team, yes, Shibi answered, with a simple nod of his head. Where did I go? Right, with a simple nod of his head. Deciding not to divulge further into this, I simply sat and enjoyed the rest of the ride to Akon. Before I could shut my eyes, however, another voice made itself known to me. Naruto, are you up there? It was Sho, the nicer diplomat, popping to my side over the edge of the carriage. Sho nearly jumped back into the carriage with a heart attack. Clearly he wasn't expecting me to appear from the top of the carriage. When did you get up there? What can I do for you, Sho? I asked after chuckling at his expense. Well, we were wondering. You were wondering? Kajime shouted from inside the carriage. Right, well, I was wondering if you could help us with our diplomatic talks with the daimyo of the Land of Snow. I furrowed a brow, prompting him to go further into detail. You're the son of Lord Forth, and because of this, your voice has greater political leverage when talking to foreign powers. But I'm just a kid. Why would anyone listen to me? I asked. Because you're a blood relative of the Hokage, and beyond that, he sent you on a diplomatic mission to their lands. This shows that the Hokage holds a vast amount of trust in them, that he's willing to place you in their care, Sho explained as he roughly climbed up onto the top of the carriage alongside me. I'm willing to help, but I wouldn't know the first thing to say. I know next to nothing when it comes to the customs of a political discussion between two powers. I responded, making Sho both surprised that I would think of this and impressed that I was curious about this aspect of the world. Well, let me teach you a thing or two about the world of foreign politics that your textbooks never went into detail on. Sho said as he began explaining the political climate of the world and how I, as the son of the Hokage, should approach this aspect of the world. It was truly enlightening to hear about this world that Minato had tried so hard to shut me away from. But I suppose it was only a matter of time before I was exposed to the world outside of the walls of Konoha. Our conversation lasted for the remainder of the trip. When we passed under a gate into the tourist town, lights hung from between the buildings, and people could be seen going about their business in the dusk of night, Shibi navigated us through the bustling streets of Hakone until finally we reached an inn that was nestled into a smaller street. Once properly tied to one of the poles, Shibi glanced up to me as I helped show down. "You wouldn't mind passing down the luggage, would you?" "Sure thing, Shibi," I responded as I untied the smaller sleeping luggage and began passing it down to the jonin while the diplomats entered the inn. "You must be the diplomats that we were tasked with escorting the remainder of the way to the land of snow," a woman said from the entrance. I ignored the voice as I passed down another bag to Shibi. "And you must be the renowned teammate that we've heard so much about," Kashime responded. "You're too kind. Please let me introduce you to my team," the woman went on to say, but I blocked him out as I finished passing the bags down to Shibi. Looking around for my own bag, I walked over to some of the larger items on top of the carriage to reach my own. When I reached the other side, I could hear the woman from before talking to Shibi. "It's been too long, Shibi. How have you been?" "Doing well, Kurenai. How has my son been? How has my son and his teammates? How has my son and his teammates been doing?" Shibi responded, as I looked through my bag to see if everything was still in order. "They've been exceptional, although Kiba can sometimes." "So you must be Shino's old man," another voice exclaimed. "It's been a while." "Hello, Kiba. And you too, Hinata Hyuga," Shibi said, as the remainder of teammate must have exited the inn. The girl must have bowed since she didn't respond. "Before I leave, I must tell you of an assignment added onto your original mission." "What else has been added?" Kurenai asked, surprised that something else included at the last minute. "You are to protect," Shibi began to say as I jumped down from the top of the carriage, "Naruto Namikaze during your mission in the Land of Snow." I looked at each of the people on teammate to get a full understanding of who was assigned to protect me. "Namikaze, as in the Hokage's son?" Kurenai questioned in surprise as she looked me over. "The Hokage had a son? I thought the only kid he had was that loudmouth Yui," Kiba exclaimed in shock. "What jutsu do you know? What taijutsu do you use? Do you like dogs?" "Kiba," Shino finally said, making his boisterous teammate quiet down. "Quit being rude." "Rude? What do you—" "The son of the Hokage couldn't become a shinobi because of medical reasons," Shino explained, as I frowned and looked to the side. "Glad to meet everyone," I said, before walking away from the group and into the inn. Hinata's eyes looking extremely saddened as well as she watched me disappear into the building. "Good. First meeting," Kurenai said as she sighed before returning her attention to Shibi. "So why is Naruto accompanying us? This was supposed to be a simple C-rank mission, escorting the diplomats of the Land of Snow and back." "Not sure, but it may have its diplomatic reasons. Just keep an eye out. If anything were to happen to him," Shibi warned, making the genin gulp. In anticipation. "So he really can't use chakra. Must be annoying living with the Hokage and his sister that would constantly rub it in his face," Kiba stated as he walked towards the inn with Hinata in tow. "Bye, father. Have a safe trip home," Shino said before walking towards the buildings as well. "Is he anything like his sister?" Kurenai asked, once the genin were gone. "Naruto's more like his father, if that helps," Shibi said, making the crimson-eyed woman grin. "That's reassuring. Maybe he can help keep my team in line," Shibi chuckled before walking down the streets towards the main road of Hakone. "Good luck." With those final words, Shibi disappeared into the crowd of people. "Kurenai-sama," a voice from behind the woman said, making her turn to see a blonde-headed boy staring back at her. "Ah, Naruto, just the person I wanted to talk to," the crimson-eyed woman said as she turned towards her new addition to the mission. "And please, just Kurenai." "What did you need to speak to me about?" I asked, furrowing my brows in curiosity. I had dropped my backpack into one of the closets that I'd be staying in. "I wanted to know the reason why you're accompanying us into the Land of Snow. So I can kill the daimyo, of course." "Oh, if that's all." "What?" Kurenai quickly looked at me in shock, only to hear chuckling coming from the boy. "What, you thought I was serious?" Kurenai gave me a death glare as I waved her off. Anyway, the real reason I'm coming along is because I wanted to get out of the village for a while, and since I would need a bodyguard, I guess my father felt it best to send me along with you. So it was just by coincidence, then? I guess so, I responded as I shrugged my shoulders. We stayed quiet as we stared down the empty street that connected to the bustling main road that ran down the center of town. Hey, Naruto, I was wondering, Kurenai went to say. Kurenai, would you and your team like to join us for dinner? We would very much like to hear of your team's adventures since becoming shinobi, Kajima said from the door at the inn. I would love to, but you wouldn't mind if Naruto tagged along, would you? Kurenai said with a smile. He can if he'd like, but I doubt he'd have much to share, the diplomat said with in a slightly annoyed tone. Oh, man. Well, I'm sure Naruto would love to, Kurenai said, but when she turned to me, I was already walking down the street. Have a pleasant dinner, Kurenai, but I think I'd prefer to eat alone if that's fine, I said as I waved a hand over my shoulder. I'll check in with you when I turn in for the night. Oh, well, have a good night then, the Jonin responded as the blonde-headed boy disappeared into the crowd. Good riddance. He would have just dragged the conversation down, Kajime said as he turned and began walking back into the inn. Come along, let's discuss where we'd like to eat. Kurenai was confused as to why the diplomat was so sour towards the young Namikaze. It followed Kajime into the inn where the rest of her team and the diplomats waited. So we're going to eat with you three? Kiba asked as they stood in a circle in the lobby at the end. We'd like to hear of your exploits since becoming Shinobi of the Leaf, if that's okay with you three. No, said, with a smile. Well, we don't have much to tell since we've only recently graduated from the academy, Keeper responded. Still, we'd like to learn about the people assigned to protect us, Sho said. I guess that makes sense, Keeper nodded his head to affirm it with his own mind. Where's Naruto? Hinata asked, making the smiles of the two diplomats falter somewhat. Won't he be joining us tonight? I believe he wanted to eat alone tonight, if I remember correctly, Kajime said with a dismissive voice. If that's all, let's look for a comfortable restaurant to eat at. We'll even cover the bill tonight. Wahoo! Looks like we're eating good tonight, boy, Kiba exclaimed as he scratched behind Akamaru's ear, who barked in excitement. Kajime chuckled at this and exited the inn along with everyone else, but within the minds of the remainder of Team 8, they knew something was going on. Also, just a little heads up. I apologize if my reading is a bit fast. I can't really help it. Scene change. I weaved through the dense crowd as I made my way towards my destination, never touching a single person. I finally found myself standing in front of a small dongo shop that was tucked between a food market and an apartment building. Walking in, I quickly noticed that the place was very packed being that the 7 tables and nearly the entire bar had people seated in all the chairs, all except for one next to the wall. Slowly I moved through the store until I sat down in the only available space. A group of kids about my age sat next to me and were boistering on about how they graduated at the top of their shinobi class. Drowning out their conversation was easy enough, but my ears perked up when I saw the waiter tending to the bar standing before me. Hello, sir. How may I help you? She was a pretty brunette that was about 5 years older than I was, but something about her smile reminded it of my own. I was wondering if I could have the black dongo, please, I said with a smile that matched her own. The waitress's mouth. God damn, I can't read. The waitress's smile twitched somewhat as the words left my mouth. Sorry, I don't think I heard you correctly. Could you repeat your order? She asked. Of course, I was wondering if I could. How about you leave the poor girl alone? I glanced to my side to see one of the newly graduated shinobi staring me down. His 2 teammates, I presume, were looking very nervous at what their outspoken teammate was doing. The boy talking to me had dark gray eyes, and that matched his hair. Can't you tell you're making her uncomfortable? I'm just trying to order. What's wrong with? The boy stood from his stool and proceeded to pin me against the wall that I was sitting next to him with his arm across my chest. I said to leave her alone. I'm a shinobi of the Yugagakure. Or Yugakure, so that means you have to do as I say. My smile slowly began to wear away as I looked into the arrogant boy's eyes. The store had gone virtually silent when this happened, as everyone was now staring at us. It's okay. I didn't hear his order over all the commotion. It's not a big deal, the waitress said, trying her best to defuse the situation, but the shinobi didn't hear her. Come on, man, leave the guy alone. This is just a misunderstanding, one of his teammates tried to say, but this got an audible humph from the gray-haired shinobi. He was messing with my sister, and people who mess with my sister are going to. He had looked over his shoulder for just a moment to talk to his teammates, but stopped when he felt a cold edge of a metal against his throat. Slowly looking down, he saw kunai pressed against his throat and a blonde with a dead eye staring back at him. His teammates were sweating bullets, but his sister surprisingly didn't look alarmed. Get your arm off of me, I said, with an emotionless voice. The shinobi quickly did so, but didn't move since I had a blade to his throat. Good. Now take your kunai back. I dropped the blade, and he caught it near his waist. You're very good at taking orders. Now sit down and continue reading. The boy sat down and turned forwards without another word. With a nod, I looked back at the waitress, who had a plastic bag of black dango and a scroll sitting in front of my empty chair. Thank you. Come back any time, the waitress said with a smile as I took the contents presented to me and I left. Once out onto the street, I picked up one of the 3 black dango sticks and bit into the tasty treat. Not bad, I thought as I opened the scroll and walked down the street in a random direction. After reading the scroll, I stopped and proceeded to walk in the opposite direction. I continued to munch on my food until I came up upon a small apartment building. It was only 2 stories tall, with a gate protecting the front lawn from anyone who didn't have a key. Taking another bite of my dango stick, I looked to my left and right to see if anyone was looking, but the busy street remained too busy for anyone to spare a boy like me a glance. As I chewed on my food, with that I entered the apartment building and down the hall towards the back of the building. Taking another stick of dango out of the bag, I stopped in front of the door that was listed in the scroll and knocked on the door. As I waited, I kept eating. Crashing noises could be heard from within, quickly putting my hood over my head, and the door swiftly opened to reveal a very angry and dirty man staring at me. What the hell do you want? He shouted, but I simply continued chewing on my food. Well, is your name? I looked at the scroll again just to make sure. Shig Hirai. Yeah, what of it? Shig asked in annoyance, but I only nodded as I rolled up the scroll and placed it in my pocket. That's all I needed to know, I responded as I took another bite of my dango. Go to... Then a shimmer caught his eye, and then there was a spray of blood. The man collapsed backwards into the room to reveal a shocked woman standing in the kitchen. She stared at the man for some time before glancing up to me, who simply stared back at her in silence. You actually, she said, but before she could say anything else, his head rolled away from his shoulders. The woman ran into the sink and proceeded to puke. I shrugged and placed the head into a bag. After this, I went to leave, but stopped when the woman spoke again. Thank you. I glanced at the woman, but she was still shaken at what just happened. He was very abusive, and you live with the choices you make, lady. Just don't make this a habit, and don't thank me. We both know this isn't the right way to go about this. Her face saddened considerably, but I ignored this and left out of the back of the building. Activating my dark vision, I snuck to the shadows and blinked to avoid detection until I finally arrived to the back of the dango shop I had just left. I slammed my fist against the door 4 times, and after a minute, the door opened to reveal the waitress from before. She still held the same smile, but when I dropped the bag in front of her, the expression dropped to the emotionless visage that I currently held. That was fast, she said as she picked up the bag, accepted the scroll that I handed to her. The contract gave you 12 hours to complete the mission. It's how I do things. It's the truth. In truth, the only reason I could have killed him in such a blatant fashion was because the only person there to see it was the person that contracted me. Otherwise, I would have gone about it differently. Taking my last bite of the dango, I flicked the stick away and held out my hand. The waitress placed a wallet of money into my hand, which I quickly stashed away into my cloak. May I have the name? Have a name for the completed contract. the waitress asked. This was the requirement for all bounty boards throughout the elemental nations. Every completed bounty needed to have a name attached to it, so board keepers could record how well we do. Phantom of the Leaf, or Phantom for short. I've been put down for both. The waitress stared at me for a second, nodding. So you've heard of me. Before nodding, so you've heard of me. Most bounty keepers have. Never thought I'd see you all the way out here, though. The waitress disposed of the bag somewhere inside the building, before returning to the door. All of your completed bounties have been inside Konoha. I'm surprised anyone has heard of me. Accepting a job to attack an Uchiha will do that for you. I frowned at this, but remained silent. This must be Danzo's doing. Is Hakone going to be the Phantom's home for a while? Unfortunately not, but it was a pleasure doing business with you, I said with a bow. The pleasure was mine, Phantom, she said with a bow of her own. If I knew it was you, then I would have given you a tougher bounty. Maybe next time. Have a pleasant day. And tell your brother to lose the hothead. It will get him killed one day. Sure thing. Have a good night. After this, I wandered out into the busy street towards my inn, where I intended to find a proper restaurant to eat at. The main reason I accepted a job from a local bounty board wasn't for monetary reasons, but to make a connection outside the walls of Konoha. Word will soon spread that I've accepted a job outside of the Land of Fire, and people will be wondering where I will pop up next. I lifted the hood from my head and lowered my scarf as I entered the ramen stand that sat comfortably down a small alley. A man stood behind the bar as he cleaned the counter of any stray dirt or dust. How are we doing tonight? The man asked, but with a jolly tone. He was larger, with black hair and brown eyes. Are all ramen chefs happy people? I thought as I sat down in one of the stools with a fake smile. The same one I carried everywhere I go when I interact with people. Doing great. Just thought I'd stop by and get a bite to eat. Fantastic. The name's Toshi. What'll you have? The woman produced a pen and pad from his apron and leaned onto the counter. Naruto, and I'll take the pork ramen. And what of your girlfriend? I heard an audible eep from behind me as I glanced over my shoulder. Standing behind me was a very flustered Hyuga, staring back at us. Get her a miso ramen, I said as I smiled back at my new guest. Sure thing, champ. I'll get it right out, the man said with a wink before disappearing back into the shop. So what do I owe the pleasure? I asked as I turned back towards the counter, but she didn't move for a while, making me sigh. I patted the stool next to me, urging her to come forwards. I'm not going to bite you. Standing there just makes things awkward. Hinata jumped up onto the stool, confused, and continued to squirm while within my presence. Why is she so shy? Naruto, she finally began after some moments of silence passed between us. I hummed back as I awaited her reason for coming and finding me. I just wanted to say. I glanced over at the girl, and to my surprise, the Hyuga heir was bowing before me. Sorry for what? Sorry, what for? She looked up at me with saddened eyes. For what Kiba said. He didn't mean it. It's just sometimes he speaks without thinking. To her surprise, however, I responded with a chuckle and waved her off. Water under the bridge. It's no big deal, but now I have a question for you. Hinata looked questioningly at me as I tapped my chin in fake thought. Why do you stutter while you're around me? Her face began to light up as I continued to think about it. I mean, you don't stutter while you're around your teammates, but for some reason... I've got to go, Hinata suddenly shouted before jumping from the stool and away from the ramen stand. Just as she left, Toshi burst from out of the back room with 2 bowls of ramen in hand. And here have a lover's bowl of... He then noticed the stool where Hinata once sat and saw that it was still moving back and forth. Where did the girl go? No clue. But it's a good thing she left. She probably would have passed out from that comment. I replied as Toshi placed my pork ramen in front of me. I grabbed a pair of wooden chopsticks from the cup on the counter and thanked him for the food. Does that girl think she has a secret? Does that girl think she has a secret crush on you or something? Toshi asked as she grabbed another pair of chopsticks and began eating the miso ramen that was left behind. I guess, but I couldn't tell you why. I've only met her one time long before this. But whatever. If anything, it's entertaining. I commented between slurps. Ah, youth, how I miss it so. Toshi said with a wide grin. You must have had a big impression on her if she'd held on to that crush for this long. I shrugged my shoulders as I continued eating my ramen. I can tell you've eaten ramen before. You can? Sure, I can. Sure can. And I could tell that it was delicious. Where, if you don't mind me asking, is it that you would normally eat? A place in Konoha named Ichiraku's, right? I stared at the man for a while before nodding my head. How did you know? There must be dozens of ramen stands in Konoha, so how did he? Because I worked with that old fart. Is Tucci still running that place? Ayame is working there now, too. But yeah, the old man still runs the show. Toshi laughed loud at this. That old fart would have ran it into the ground without her help. It's a good thing that Ayame decided to stick around then. He then looked up at the ceiling as fond memories began flooding back from all those years ago. I miss the old days, when my life was easier. When I woke up, worked with my pals, and went out drinking the night away. Why'd you leave? Family issues, but you don't need to worry your little head over something like that. Toshi said as he grabbed our now empty bowls and placed them into the sink on the other side of the bar. Tell you what, as a memory for the night, let's have a drink. A wine bottle was placed in front of me, with 2 saucers next to it. You know I'm underaged, I said with a furrowed brow. And I'm overage. So what? Toshi said as he poured both the saucers full before placing the cup back on top of the bottle. But don't you worry. We'll only have one. I smiled as I picked up the small glass, making Toshi smile widely. There you go, boy. To friendship and to youth. We raised our glasses into the air and poured the liquor down our throats. The burning sensation ran through my body, and as I felt the first bite of alcohol reach my stomach, I nearly spit my drink up, making Toshi laugh at my obvious discomfort. First drink? Yeah, I responded as I placed the saucer down. To the white bottle, which Toshi quickly stashed away behind the counter. Glad I could be part of it. Toshi then looked back and forth down the tiny alleyway and nodded his head. Well, I best be closing up. It's getting late, and you should be getting home. Have a good night, Toshi, I said as I jumped down from the stool while leaving enough money behind for the 2 bowls of ramen. You too, Naruto-kun. I stopped in my tracks and looked over my shoulder to see that Toshi had already disappeared into the back room. I stared at the empty ramen stand for a few moments longer, before walking down the alleyway and into the bustling main street of Hakone. Something isn't right, I thought as I moved through the dense crowd and towards the end. The burning in my stomach was flaring up, and my vision was beginning to grow ever more misty. Was I drugged? I nearly fell over, but was caught by a stranger. Are you okay? I looked up, and through my hazy eyes I could see a woman with long black hair and golden eyes staring back at me with concern, but beneath the concern, you don't look so good. Please let me. Naruto, is that you? With my ever-dimming eyes, I looked to see Kiba and Shino approaching us. Are you feeling okay? Are you this boy's friends? The woman asked, but Akamaru began barking with anger in his face. Quiet, boy. Not really, but we know him. Is everything okay? Kiba asked as he eyed the woman in confusion, but Shino was already at my side, lifting me up. Thank you for helping him, but we should be able to take it from here, Shino said as he lifted one of my arms over his shoulder and began walking away. I looked back at the woman, but I could barely make out her face. While she looked concerned, she also looked annoyed. Please, make sure he's taken care of. He doesn't look so good. With that, we disappeared into the crowd of people and quickly found ourselves in the quiet street leading towards the inn. Are you drunk or something? Kiba asked as he looked me over. But the burning was only intensifying as we neared the inn. I remained silent as I tried to cage this pain and from growing any further, because you look like you're about to puke or something. Puke, of course. Shino, give me a moment. The silent boy looked questionably to me, but once he released me, I quickly ran to the nearest garbage can and shot my finger into my mouth, and then the obvious happened. I puked and puked and puked some more until as much of the drug had been expelled from my body. Holy, what the hell? Kiba exclaimed as he watched me puke into the dumpster, but Shino simply watched in silence. Once done, I leaned against the green garbage can, The few remnants of the drug that had already been absorbed into my body fought against my immune system, but it was a losing battle for the drug. As I could feel the burning sensation begin to disappear, I knew it was a drug because I've been introduced to it before during my training with Danzo's Anbu. It was meant to burn my stomach and make me pass out from the internal pain and nausea. You must have ate something really bad if you threw up like that. You should have come out to eat with us. Whatever, I said as I lifted myself from the garbage can and continued on down the street towards the inn. What's his problem? Kiba asked, to nobody in particular, as he followed the blonde towards the inn. Akamaru whined at his master's words, as Shino simply stared in silence. Yeah, was it really something he ate? Shino thought, as he ran to catch up to us. He was pushing his finger into his mouth, meaning he forced himself to puke. I walked down the hallway and knocked on the door to the room across from where I put my stuff in. Hello? Kurenai answered from inside the room. I'm here, I responded as the door opened to reveal the Jonin in her normal attire. Naruto. Have a good time? I sent Kiba and Shino to look for you. We're getting up bright and early, so I wanted everyone to have a decent time. Before I could respond, Kiba barged into the conversation. Sure, he did, if it wasn't for all the puking he did just a moment ago. Kiba commented while he passed by us and into the room Shino and Kiba were sharing. Puking? Are you okay? Hinata asked as she approached us. I'm fine, just something I ate is all, I said, trying to calm them down from my potential drugging. If they knew about this, then they'd escort me back to Konoha in a flash, meaning my mission would be a failure, and I don't fail missions. Are you sure? Do you need to see a doctor before we leave? Kurenai asked, making me frown. Look, I'm fine. I just need to sleep it off, so worry about the diplomats. I'm just tagging along the ride, I said as I moved towards our room. If you need anything, just... The door closed as she spoke, making her frown. Knock. Do you think he'll be okay? Hinata asked as she looked at the closed door in worry. Don't worry about Naruto. He'll be fine. Just a little bit of food poisoning is probably all it was, Kurenai said with a smile, but as Shino passed, his mind wandered. Why did he force himself to puke like that? Was it possibly to expel the food poisoning faster? Still unsure as to what was going on, the silent boy opened the door to their room to see me sitting on my bed, reading a scroll. Kiba was laying on his own bed, but Akamaru was sitting to my side, staring at me. It was as if he was confused about something. I glanced to my right and furrowed my brow at the curious pup. You okay? Akamaru softly barked as he continued to stare at me. Leave him alone, Akamaru. He probably doesn't like dogs anyway, Kiba said as he turned onto his side and away from us. I shot a glare at Kiba before returning my gaze to the small dog before me, who was still staring at me. The dog must have been gauging who exactly I was, and if I could be trusted. Just for the record, I don't dislike dogs, I stated as I took off my scarf and placed it next to my pillow, Akamaru watching me as I did this. In fact, about a year ago, I stopped a dog from being beaten in the alleyway close to my school. Akamaru's eyes lit up as he listened to my tale. It was after school had been let out but I had to stay late to help clean up the classroom. When I left the campus, I heard some people shouting from a tight little alleyway. I smiled softly as I scratched the back of my head. No, normally I would have avoided this, but when I heard something, do you know what it was? Akamaru could only stare on as I looked up at the ceiling, a whimper from a dog. Something in me burned inside when I heard that noise. I entered the alleyway to see two guys kicking and pushing this little golden dog. She must have been only a few months older than you. I don't know what came over me, but I shoved the two guys into the wall and took off with the golden pup in my arms. I frowned as I ran through the memory in my mind once again. She looked so small, so hurt. I quickly took her to the closest place that I knew could take care of her. Do you know where it was I took her? The Inuzuka compound. I looked up to see Kiba staring at me as well. I remember when it happened, but I had no idea it was you who brought her to us. Her name's Emmy, for beautiful blessing, because it was a blessing she even lived. So she lived. That's good to hear, I responded with a smile, a real smile, one that I hadn't worn since my training. And Emmy is currently training to be a ninken. But she's always looking at the gate in anticipation, Kiba sighed as he remembered his mother training with the Golden. I guess she's waiting for the person that saved her to return someday. She'll forget about me when she's paired up with another shinobi and living a happy life as a ninken. I'm happy that I could help. I'm just happy I could help, I said, but then I felt fur underneath my hand. Looking down, Akamaru had pushed his head into my hands in an effort to show his gratitude for saving one of his friends. I wouldn't be too sure of that, Kiba said, as he got comfortable under the sheets. Dogs don't tend to forget the things that are important to them. How would she even remember me? I didn't even think she was conscious. Your scent. If there's one thing dogs don't forget, it's the smell of others, especially the ones they deem close. Kiba then closed his eyes in an attempt to sleep. You should stop by the compound sometime. I'm sure she'd love to see you again. I smiled softly as I continued petting the puppy next to me. I doubt that's a good idea, not after all the horrible things I've done. Dragging another innocent into this hell, even if it's a dog, wouldn't be a good idea. Maybe, I responded, as I fell onto my bed as Akamaru returned to his master's side. But having a ninken here on my mission may make the assassination a little more complicated. Scene change. Rise and shine, boys. We're about to leave. Kura and I shouted through the door of our room, but I was already up and ready to go. Looking over to my companions, I saw that Akamaru was the only one awake, with Shino and Kiba begrudgingly still getting up. As I moved to the door, I found that the small dog had followed me out into the hallway. Want to come along? I asked, to which the pup barked with enthusiasm. I see. You found a new friend, Kura and I said as we moved into the main lobby of the inn. Looks like it, I stated. But Akamaru barked to show that he did enjoy being around me. Kura and I chuckled at the sight, but then turned to see the diplomats appearing from a separate hallway. How was the rooms? Kura and I asked. Acceptable, Kajime said, but he saw me. He simply nodded his head and walked outside, followed closely by other diplomats. Is there a problem between you two? I asked. Kura and I asked, but I shrugged my shoulders. Akamaru, however, was lightly growling at the man. Nothing for you to worry about, just a little disagreement is all. I responded, as I configured my backpack so it was a little more comfortable on my back. If you say so, Kura and I replied, as I moved towards the door leading to the carriage. I'll start packing their luggage on top of the carriage while you wait for your Genin team. You don't have to worry about that. I'll have Shino and Kiba do it when they arrive. It's fine. It's something to do while we wait. With that, I exited the inn to find a pile of luggage sitting next to the carriage and the trio of diplomats sitting inside the carriage. Said carriage. Guess we better get started, huh? Akamaru barked as I moved towards the large pile of bags and packs. It took me about 30 minutes before everything was atop the carriage and secured so nothing would fall off while we traversed the countryside. You know, you could have waited, Kiba said as I glanced down at teammate as they approached the carriage. We would have helped you. You have enough to worry about with protecting both the diplomats and myself. It's the least I could do, I replied as I sat down onto the edge of the carriage, but my motion shook said carriage when I fell. Could you not shake the carriage, you little brat? Kajime shouted from inside the carriage. Sorry, Kajime-san. It won't happen again, I responded as I climbed to the front so I wouldn't disturb them. Teammate looked to each other in confusion, but I waved it off. Remember, my problems, not yours. Okay, Kura and I said as she watched me untie the horses from the wooden bar that they had been strung to the night before. Okay, team. I want you to form Formation Charlie. Understood. Yes, ma'am. The three Genins shouted in unison and jumped to their appropriate positions around the carriage. This being Hinata to our right, Kiba to our left, and Shino taking up the rear. Kura and I climbed up to take the reins while I sat next to her. Sitting outside, Kura and I asked once the carriage began moving down the fairly quiet main street. It was so early in the morning that only ones up were the people opening their stores and preparing for another busy day. The sun was just beginning to peek its orange head over the horizon and push away the morning mist that blanketed the air. What can I say? I enjoy being outside rather than stuck inside a wooden carriage, I responded. You know it would be safer for you inside, Kira and I stated as a group of middle schoolers ran past us, going to stuff me inside with them. I questioned as I leaned back against the wooden seat. Kira and I didn't respond, but she silently confirmed my thoughts. How long are we going to be on the road? It should take us about 10 hours until we reach Kazuhana Castle. Once we reach the castle, diplomatic talks will commence tomorrow, Kurenai stated as we left the city limits of Hakon and out into the densely wooded road, and led north towards the port town that would provide a ferry to the land of snow. And it looks like you dressed appropriately for the occasion. That I did. Did the diplomats tell you what their talks will be about? I asked, to which Kurenai nodded their head. They are to renew our open border treaty and discuss possible changes to our current trade pact, Kurenai said, but then she looked to me with a glint in her eye. And you're supposed to be part of it? Sort of. Sho said that he simply wanted me to be there as a sort of sign of trust. Kurenai looked at me, slightly shocked at my level of maturity when it came to this matter, but I ignored her. I was told that my part would be when I was sent along this little mission, so I'm aware of my purpose. So you're just here to help the diplomats? Kiba asked from beside the carriage. Sort of, but in reality, I just wanted to get out of the village for a while. See the world and all that happy stuff, I replied as I shrugged my shoulders. At this point, I'll take what I can get. I hear you. This is the first time I've been out of the village in a long time, Kiba replied, to which Akamaru barked in agreement. It would seem that Kiba was beginning to respect me a little more after he learned that I was the one who saved Emmy. Naruto. I looked to my right to see Hinata playing with the bottom of her jacket. Yes, I know this can sound weird, but do you normally do? What do you mean? I think she's trying to ask what a normal day entails for the son of the Hokage, Kurenai stated, but when the words left her mouth, only the death of others flashed before my eyes. I wonder how many people I've killed since Danzo's training. Just normal stuff, I guess, I replied, returning to my normal visage. It hurt to constantly keep it up, but this was the ultimate test, to see how long I could fake this alternate ego without anyone catching on. Yui has seen this cold side of me, but she thinks I'm angry with her, and that's the cause of this cold side. But in reality, it's something so much worse. Well, normal for us can be very different from your version of normal, Kurenai responded, making me sigh at the comment. I guess it is vastly different than my own. Our worlds are just too different, I suppose. I go to school, study for tests, practice martial arts. Then I started to say, wait, you can fight? Kiba exclaimed, making me look over to Kurenai, to the dog-born confusion. I mean, I can protect myself if people threaten me and stuff. Why? I just thought since you're the son of the Hokage that people wouldn't mess with you and all. Kiba stated with a shrug, making me sit back against the seat with a heavy sigh. If only life was that simple, I muttered out as I closed my eyes. Kurenai unfortunately heard my words and decided to comment. We all have our problems, and not everyone is willing to share them with the people they just met. Where was I? Scene change. Naruto. I shook from my slumber, rolling slightly from atop the luggage as I went to open my eyes. Naruto. My eyes shot open once I heard the urgency in the voice of the Jonin. What? I asked in an equally hushed tone, but I could see the woman's eyes dart to and fro in an uneasy way. A brisk chill tugged at us from the air, and a light overcast blocked out the blue sky. We were nearing the border of the land of frost. If I had to guess, a port sat on the northern edge of the land of hot water, which held the ship that would ferry us across the waters to the island nation of snow. It was Yugakure's only northern port, and it sat uneasily between the land of frosts and of the lands of frost and rice. Akamaru smells something off about this place, and Hinata can see several people in the forest around us. They look to be preparing for an attack. Kurenai whispered as they continued to pretend that they had no idea where we were quickly being surrounded. I need you to get inside the carriage, Anne. Before she could finish the sentence, I caught a shimmer of light out of the corner of the eye. I jumped backward just as an arrow slipped past my face and fell off the back of the carriage. Naruto, are you okay? Shino quickly asked as he was by my side in less than a second. I'm fine, but a loud chorus of shouts could be heard from all around us as bandits sprang from the thick vegetation. Sensei, there's at least 30 of them, Hinata shouted as she jumped in front of one of the doors, while Kiba did the same on the other side. Kiba, Hinata, make sure nobody gets inside the carriage. Shino, protect Naruto. I'll take care of these bandits, Kurenai shouted as she jumped down and towards some of the bandits on Hinata's side. Stay with me, Naruto, Shino said as he stood in front of me. One of the bandits dashed towards us. The shaded boy held out his hands towards the man, and a torrent of bugs sprang forth. Black bugs covered his body as he screamed and fell to the ground, but my normal vision began to drop slightly as I watched them fighting around me. I could help them with my powers, but then it would threaten my mission and my cover overall. Still, if the leaf shinobi lost them, then my mission would become much more difficult. I glanced to my left to see Hinata and Kurenai engaged with a large group of bandits in front of me. 3 more bandits stood at parity with Shino, and to my sight, Akamaru. Kiba shouted as the pup was kicked away from the Inuzuka and towards another bandit. The man laughed as he approached the dog as Kiba fought against at least 7 bandits. He couldn't leave his post, or the men would have access to the carriage. And then was his partner. Is this your dog? Looks like I'm going to have to teach him a lesson. The man grinned as he pulled out a knife, and as he neared the beaten dog, just as he was about to plunge the dagger into Akamaru's foot, as he was about to plunge the dagger into Akamaru, a foot that was swiftly smashed into the side of his face. The bandit stumbled backwards as he gripped onto his face in pain. Who in the hell? He looked in the direction that the blow had come from to see me standing in front of the dog. You're going to pay for that. He quickly charged towards me, but as he brought his knife down onto me, I quickly parried the swipe while smashing my knee into his gut. As he staggered backwards, once more I went to kick his jaw. As I flipped backwards, the bandit saw this and tried to dodge, but my foot still connected with the handle of his knife and sent it flying into the air. Without a weapon, the man sent a punch towards me, which I dodged before sending my own punch towards him who blocked. You know, you're pretty good for a kid. I then went for a quick swipe of the legs. But the man jumped backwards to dodge the strike. Nice try, bud. It was then that he stood surprised as I caught the knife and swiftly cut him across the chest. He staggered backwards, gripping the now wound as I slowly walked towards him. Adrenaline surged through his body as anger and rage appeared in his eyes. I'll kill you! He charged towards me, but there were so many openings that all I needed to do was choose one. Ducking underneath his punch, I plunged the knife into his shoulder while simultaneously cracking my elbow against the side of his head to knock him out. I stood up and glanced down at the knocked out man with the blood dripping from my fingertips and knuckles. He shouldn't be dead, but he definitely needed to see a doctor if he wanted to live for long. A bark drew my attention away from the beaten man and back to the downed dog. Walking towards the wounded dog, I wiped my hand on some stray grass and coursed my fingers through his soft fur. You okay, little fella? Akamaru whimpered as I looked over to see Shino supporting Kiba against 4 of the bandits. Shino must have watched me beat the bandit and decided to support Kiba. That supporting Kiba was more important. Smart. A loud slam could be heard against the other side of the carriage. A slam so heavy that it shook the carriage to and fro. Sensei, I heard Hinata shout in panic. Stay here and rest. I'll see what's going on, I softly said. But Akamaru barked something and pointed his snout into the direction of the road that we had come from. I brushed my hand across his fur and nodded my head to the pup before walking towards the other side of the carriage. Leaning against the side of the carriage was a beaten Hinata holding onto her shoulder with several scruff marks across her body. In front of her was 10 of the bandits, 2 of which had Kurenai restrained against the ground. How did she lose to a bunch of... I began to wonder, but then I saw it, a man wearing a brown Jonin jacket with a slashed-out Iowa symbol across it. He was tall, with brown hair and teal eyes. Oh, there's a Jonin. He must have surprised her or something. Naruto, they captured Kurenai-sensei, Hinata said with panic in her voice. I stared the man down as he looked to me with a grin across his face. When I heard a Konoha diplomatic team was traveling through this area, I knew that to the right people, their heads could catch a pretty penny if sold to the right person. The Newtnin said with a grin. Not very much, though. Every major shinobi village wouldn't come near a diplomatic team on a mission to another village, meaning he must be looking to sell them to a private corporation or individual. Even then, they wouldn't offer much because of the possible possible backlash of the villages. He must be very desperate. If it means letting the shinobi and diplomats go, I can make you an even better offer than the small amount of money that you'd get for some diplomatic team, I stated as I approached the obvious leader of the group. Oh, and what can a kid like you offer me in their stead? The Jonin. Based on your jacket, you've heard of the fourth Hokage of the Hidden Leaf, correct? The man's eyes turned from cockiness to pure anger. And who hasn't? That bastard killed my brother during the war. What of it? The man said with venom in his voice. And you've heard he has 2 children, correct? It was then Kurenai knew what I was playing at. Even Hinata looked shocked at what I was doing. Get on with it. Why are you bringing this up now? The Nuke-Nin shouted in annoyance. Because what if I told you that I could give you one of his children? Wouldn't that be a much better bargaining tool than a few diplomats? The man's eyes lit up once he heard those words. We both know that diplomats are the worst bargaining tool there is, but the son of the Hokage, I'm sure there's several villages out there that would love to get their hands on him. Naruto, you don't have to, Kurenai went to say, but one of the bandits quickly silenced her. And you can assure me one of his children. I nodded my head as he looked at me suspiciously. As Kiba with Akamaru in his arms, Shina rounded the corner to the carriage, to see what's going on. How? Naruto, don't do this, Hinata shouted in desperation, because Naruto Namikaze is standing right in front of you. I bowed deeply to the man as he looked at me in shock. You're the Flash's son? I nodded my head as a maddening grin appeared on his face. The Iwo Nuke-Nin slowly approached me as I stared back with cold eyes. You have no idea how long I've waited for this moment. I can finally, truly hurt the Hokage of yours, make him feel the same pain as everyone else that died during the war, because I'm not going to sell you right after we capture you. No, I'm going to torture you until you're begging to die at my hands. And then, and only then, am I going to sell you to the highest bidder that will put you through the same hell that I put you through. He caressed his hand down my cheek as he imagined all the horrible things he would do to me. Teammates stared at the man in shock after hearing his monologue. Did he hate their Hokage that much? Then so be it. But it looks like your revenge will have to wait, I replied, making the maddening man look at me in confusion. What are you talking about? The Iwo Nuke-Nin asked, but then a sword was placed against his throat behind him. The bandits all lay knocked out, with several shinobi standing over them. All of the shinobi wore jonin jackets, the headbands that marked them as shinobi of Yugakure. You planned this, didn't you? I only stared back as the sword neared his throat. Stand down and let yourself be captured, Nuke-Nin, the Yugakure shinobi said. The Iwo Nuke-Nin didn't move at first. He simply stared me down as he thought of what to do next. Don't do it. In the Nuke-Nin's hand was a kunai, but his hand was trembling as he struggled to not attack me. I was so close, he said, as his maddening eyes began to morph into sadness. I nearly avenged my brothers and sisters that died on the battlefield. Damn it. The kunai dropped from his hand, and the weapon dropped. As the weapon dropped, the Nuke-Nin was quickly detained. Damn it. You are to remain silent until told otherwise. You are. The Yugakure shinobi began saying as he and another shinobi began escorting him away, as the other shinobi did the same with the bandits that were knocked out or detained. Are you okay, Naruto? Hinata asked as she approached me and began looking me over. But then she looked in my eyes. She stopped for just a moment. And for just a moment, she caught a glimpse of the deep darkness they held. Naruto? Yeah, I'm fine, I replied as my cold eyes disappeared into the place. And in their place was exhaustion, just tired is all. Thanks. I looked over my shoulder to Kiba with Akamaru in his hands. The pup looked beaten and was but definitely not out for saving him. I scratched Akamaru's ear and the pup leaned into my touch. Don't worry about it. I then looked to Shino, who nodded his head in silent appreciation. Is everyone all right? Kurenai asked as she approached us. Like Hinata and Akamaru, she looked beaten, but certainly wasn't severely damaged. It would seem that the Jonin caught her by surprise and restrained her before the Leaf Jonin took any serious damage. We all nodded, to which she sighed in relief. Good to hear. I'm going to check up on the diplomats and see how they're doing. You, Blondie. I glanced over to see one of the Yugakure shinobi. I walked over and looked at her questioningly. You did a good job distracting him until we got here. We were warned of possible bandit activity in this sector, but when a Nuke Nin got involved, our search intensified. In any case, we'll be taking care of these bandits and the Nuke Nin. Will be delivered to the Iowa Hunter Nin as soon as we contact them. Thank you for Konoha's assistance in this matter. She then bowed and followed her fellow shinobi down the path leading towards Hakone. By the way, how did you know we were coming anyway? It's not like you have any sensor abilities, Kiba asked once I returned to the Genin. I then pointed to the dog in his arms, making him look at me in confusion. Akamaru, I nodded my head, but he still looked confused. How could you tell what he said? I didn't. I just trusted him, I guess. I shrugged my shoulders. Couldn't tell you exactly, but that's all there is to it. Kiba simply stared at me in shock with a small amount of shock. Kiba simply stared at me with a small amount of shock in his eyes. What? Naruto, are you really okay? I looked to the Hyuga to see worry in her eyes. She must have been seen beneath my mask for a brief moment. The things he said were terrifying. I'm fine, Hinata, thanks for worrying, I replied with a smile, comforting her somewhat. Looks like the diplomats are all safe. Good job distracting the Nuke Nin until reinforcements arrived, Kurenai said as she approached us. We're about 30 minutes away from the port that holds our ferry. Once we reach the land of snow, it's another 2 hours until we reach Kazahana Castle. Are you okay, Hinata? That was a nasty punch you took. I'm fine, she smiled, but she was gripping her shoulder with her free hand. You take it easy in the carriage, Hinata. That's an order. Kiba, how's Akamaru? Kurenai asked as she glanced to the dog in his arms. Roughed up, but he'll be fine with some rest, Kiba responded, as he kept petting his Ninken. Good to hear. Shino and yourself are going to have to take up position around the carriage since Hinata is out of action. Do you need someone to watch Akamaru for you? Kurenai asked as we moved towards the carriage. I can take care of him since I'm going to be in the carriage. It's the least I can do. Since I can't help, Hinata stated with a smile. That would be great. Thanks, Hinata, Kiba said as he handed Akamaru over to Hinata. As I opened the door to let Hinata climb in. Are you hurt, Hyuga-san? I heard Nao say as a pair of hands helped Hinata into the cart. I'm fine, just need some rest is all. Hinata said as I closed the door to give them some privacy. Naruto, I know this may sound out of place, but can you navigate a carriage with Hinata out for the moment? We need an extra person to cover us, Kurenai said as I climbed up to take the reins to the two horses. I leave it to me, I responded as I picked up the leather straps. Okay, Shino, take the rear. Kiba, take the right. I'll cover the left. Once they were all in position, Kurenai turned forwards, proud of how her team handled the situation. All right, teammate, move out. Well, that's the end of this chapter. It was kind of crap because I can't read for I'm illiterate. It's hard to read too fast. Well, anyhow, till next time.